and the guy had live bears on the property. And I said, well, Shady Greenhorn is an interesting name. And he goes, well, it's a funny story. The guy moved out here from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia in the 1920s, and he built this stuff and opened a little motel over there. And back then, before they built the 25, this gravel road was the road. This is how you went from Taos to Albuquerque, was on this road. And so what traffic there was had to go past him. And it turns out he made moonshine, this guy. And the reason he had the bears is he had dug a hole in the ground with this iron plate, and the bears were chained to the iron plate. So if revenuers ever came around, they had to contend with 2 live bears to see what was under that door, So needless to say, he never got caught.
Welcome to Capturing the Abandoned, a foray into the world of rural and urban abandoned exploration. Hello, this is Vincent Gearhart, and along with my co-host, Mr. Lex Nichols, we'd like to welcome you to episode 18 of Capturing the Abandoned with our guest, Mr. Brian Fuller. Over the past 18 episodes, we've been doing this podcast to help recognize and highlight some of the talented rural and urban photographic explorers that are out there in Bando world. And it has given Lex and I the extreme pleasure to get to know these artists as friends, and it has allowed us to share a handful of these wonderful and talented artists with the rest of you who enjoy this interesting hobby or passion of capturing the abandoned. We're never sure what the future holds, but for now, this will be our final featured artist interview. We have both experienced changes in our lives that moving forward will not allow us to continue this podcast the way we had envisioned it. As it goes, people change, times change, and it is now time to move on. As this podcast is hosted by Anchor, which is now part of Spotify, all past episodes should be available for quite some time into the future. As long as they're hosting it, it should stay available on many of the podcatchers out there, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and many more. And finally, we just want to say thank you all for sharing this journey with us. In this episode of Capturing the Abandoned, Lex and I had the honor and pleasure of interviewing Mr. Brian Fuller, who calls Las Vegas, Nevada his home, when he's home. He has provided us with many wonderful stories from small-town USA from across the country, and has offered us quite a different twist on our shadiest place question. Mr. Fuller has several projects in the works, including plans to open a gallery in Nevada called the Storytellers Gallery, and he is currently crowdsourcing an art book of his photography. And there will be a link to this project in the show notes. In our visit with Brian, we were happy to learn a couple of new words, which includes poetography, which is the process that Brian is currently doing with many of his images, and storyokie, which will be making its debut very soon. Without further ado, here's our interview with storyteller Brian Fuller. Tonight, Lex and I are honored to have with us Mr. Brian Fuller from the city that never sleeps, Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the Capturing the Abandoned podcast, Brian.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's good to have you on. We've looked through your bio. You got some really good stuff. So where are you located, and give us some background on yourself.
I grew up in the Midwest. I was born in Kansas, but grew up in Iowa mostly. I've lived all over New York, L.A., did 2 stints in Cleveland, but I've been in Las Vegas now for a little over 10 years. That's home. They'll take me out of there in a body bag.
Now, are you like downtown Vegas, or are you on the outskirts, or whereabouts are you?
Well, currently, I'm way out in the suburbs. Like if you looked at a map of Vegas, I'm at about, 10:30. And if you went another 200 yards, you wouldn't be in Las Vegas anymore. It's way out there. I used to live right on the Strip, but I'm moving out of there at the end of this month out to a little town up north called Pioche, Nevada, Pioche, for those of you who keep score at home. And that's about 900 people, and 5 national parks touch it. And I'm looking forward to some quiet time up there.
So are you really familiar with Las Vegas in general, or?
Oh yeah, yeah. You need to cut the line. I'm your guy.
So Brian, how did you get into this type of the abandoned photography?
Really kind of by accident. I sort of set myself free professionally about 15 years ago now, and I do a lot of business consulting is my primary my job. And so I've got clients all over the country, and so the easiest way is just to drive around. It's the most efficient, where I can see 2 or 3 in a day instead of going to airports and back and forth. And I've always had a love for photography. I'm a big fan of like Diana Arbus. There's all kinds of people that have really inspired me over the years, but I grew up really poor, and the idea of having a camera and film was just not possible. So about the time I started doing this traveling, the phones got pretty good. The cameras got to where you could do something with them. Mm-hmm. And I was just, taking pictures. Really, I have a series on Facebook called Road to Ruin on my personal page. And so every year I just kind of document what I'm doing and where I'm going. And, it's pretty entertaining, at least it's intended to be. And so once the phone started getting good, I realized I could actually make on the phone the things I was seeing in my head. I would look at an interesting wall with a cool texture and color on it and take a picture of it, but it didn't look like it looked in my head. And other people would look at that and be like, "Why did you take a picture of a wall?"
I do it all the time.
Yeah. And, I was real proud of it, but it didn't make a lot of sense to folks. Even now, I'm not sure it does, but at least they can tell why I did it. But anyway, about 10 years ago, maybe, or 9 years ago, I had my last BlackBerry, and I was sitting in a bar in Fargo, North Dakota, and it was failing to do whatever I was asking it to do for about the 43rd time, and I just smashed it on the bar. And I went the next day and got an iPhone because I figured if anybody would have one in stock, it would be in Fargo, and sure enough, they did. And so I got my first iPhone, then it was an iPhone 4, and I was reading up what are the good camera apps, and Camera Plus was the go-to app at the time, so I downloaded it and learned how to use it, and that's what I've used ever since. And so everything I shoot is I've had as many as 3 different iPhones. I'm not that particular now. I only have 2, but they keep getting better, and Camera Plus keeps improving the app and adding to it. And so as I've sort of learned how to master it, or hope to try to master it, it's come right along with me. So it's been good. I feel like I'm showing the picture that I can see in my head to the people I'm showing the picture to,
Yeah, good.
I think there's 2 kinds of photographers. There's documentarians, right? They want to tell you what that thing looked like.
Exactly.
And then there's storytellers. And my things don't always look like what they look like, but they're trying to convey a message. They're telling a story. And I started about, a year and I was titled them, and then I started actually writing. I'd put like song lyrics or some writing sample, tell a story about the thing when I was posting it. And then about a year and a half ago, maybe, I started writing poetry to go with each one.
Oh,
and so I call it poetography, right? So I'm clever.
That works.
So what I do in the moment is I just, I know why I'm taking the picture, and just whatever thoughts occur to me, I'll just make some notes. I carry a notebook with me all the time. And then I'm usually about 8 weeks behind in editing from shooting. Like I don't, edit the same day I make the picture. So sure. I refer back to that notebook, and then I, remember that moment and flesh out those ideas and try to tell that story in words as well as with the image itself. And I travel like 300 days a year, right? So, my mail would pile up, be like hip deep by the time I got home, and it's just a drag. And so I had a buddy who is a photographer, professional photographer named Michael Mays. Hi, Mike, if you're listening. And he had put a post on Facebook, "Hey, I'm looking for a roommate. I'm moving." And I'm like, "Oh my God, sign me up." And there's somebody to pay the bills on time, who can collect the mail, and I don't have to be there. And it was great. It was a great deal for him because I was never there. It was a 3-bedroom apartment with him all but 100 days of the year, 100, maybe he had 70 days he had to deal with me, but the rest of the time was him. So it was a really good situation. Anyway, Mike was, Instagram was kind of a baby at that time. And being a photographer, he was looking at it. And he said, hey, you should, looking at your photography, you should really check out some of these sites. And he had, just kind of gone through and found a few. These are the other kind of this gritty, grimy, abandoned stuff, things that are kind of like what you're doing that other people are also doing. You might like that. So I did. I'm like, oh, wow, there's this whole thing out there. And this was exciting to find that. And like Sierra Winds was one of the first ones I followed. She does a great job. And Jill, she's from Canada. I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but just absolutely wonderful photographer. So it's really inspiring.
Jill Coop?
Yeah, Jill Coop. Anyway, so it kind of tuned me into it. And it also gave me something to shoot for. They've been doing this for a while already by then. And for one, it's cool to see other people that see the world similarly. Our work is not the same, but I could tell that the same, like I would pull over for the same things that they would, I might see a different part of the picture than they saw or do it a different way, but I was attracted to the same kinds of things. And I think anytime you feel less weird, that's good. And also, having a photographer, a guy who was making a big chunk of his living as a photographer, say that your photography is good is very inspiring.
That helps a little bit.
The camera. Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned you just shoot with your iPhone. Is that correct?
That's correct. I've never owned a camera. I tried one. I had a girlfriend a couple of years ago that was all big into digital photography. So we went on a trip just roaming around Nevada for about 2 weeks. And I tried to use that camera every day, and I just hated it. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll give it a try again. But I like the immediacy of the phone. I like the intimacy of it. And now when you're using Camera Plus 2, there's a RAW setting that you can use, and it's basically the same as a digital camera. There's almost no difference.
Oh, yeah, right. It uses the full picture. Yeah.
Correct. So it really puts your phone on hyperdrive. And because that was one of the things early on. If you wanted to print something the size of a postage stamp, it was great. If you wanted to print something like 2 feet by 3 feet, forget it. Unless you just wanted a picture of pixels.
Yeah. So you just use Camera Plus then, huh?
That's all I use. Yeah,
that's all you use. Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. Everything is shot on the phone and edited on the phone.
Do you have any, you set up your own filters and things like that on it, or?
I don't. They have a way to do it, but I'm old and I don't like learning new stuff a lot. So, sometimes I'll learn enough that I'm having a good time, but I don't want to get crazy, And another reason for me not to have a camera, I don't ever want to know what focal length means or any of that. I mean, I so admire people that do that shoot the film, but I have more than 10,000 to finished images, and it's partly because it's immediate. I hop out of the car, I see something while I'm on a walk or whatever, and I can pull out that phone, take the picture, tell the story right now. And I can take 100 of them. I'm out nothing. You know what I mean? There's no not risking anything.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Well, it fits in my back pocket, so I'm not carrying this brick around with me. And,
right.
Because when normal times, like I'm out. I'm not sitting in a motel room. I'm out at a nightclub or a bar or something almost every night of the week. And so having that thing to have to chunk around or worry about where it's at, I just don't want it. I like just popping the phone out of my pocket. And I have 2 pockets, so I carry a phone in each pocket. 2 different models. But,
that's good.
Ryan, how long have you been doing this?
That I've cared about it about 10 years. That I've really, 9-10 years that I've really been paying attention, like editing and like trying to tell that story, not just randomly going, hey, I was at this place and took this picture, where I was purposefully making an effort to create art.
You've got the phone thing figured out. Your work shows, and the beauty is we can't tell what kind of camera you shot it on, and that's the beauty.
Right.
Whether you're using a phone or a cheap camera, there's nothing that says, hey, this was a $10,000 Nikon or this was an iPhone or whatever. So this is my favorite question, so I'm going to let Vincent ask.
Uh-oh.
We always like to ask this. Lex, you always have the honors, but I guess I'll take it tonight. That's for sure. So what is the shadiest or worst place that you've ever been to and taken pictures? I know you got a story.
Man. I've got a bunch. Well, it's funny. I'm going to open a gallery here in a year or so. It's going to be called Storytellers Gallery. That's the name of what I'm going to call it. But, I mean, the shady stuff, I shoot a lot of urban decay. So, you know, when you're in, like, the abandoned part of Detroit, which is a big part, it's dangerous. You really don't know. And I've been surprised by squatters a couple of times where I think I'm shooting an abandoned structure, and all of a sudden, you know, somebody pops out of a room. And, you know, when I'm like taking Detroit or East St. Louis as an example, you know, they're tough, man. And like I'm never more than about 15 feet from my car, and it's running. You just don't know. But I've never had a getaway. Yeah, but when you say shady, it reminds me of a really funny story. I was in New Mexico. I was taking a back road from Taos, I think, down to Albuquerque. And so I get distracted easily, like, you know, anything can happen. I'm like, oh, you know, a butterfly. I drive off some other direction. And so I was on this little gravel road, and I wasn't that far off the 25, so it wasn't like I was way out in the wilderness, but also you couldn't see anything from there. You know, it's New Mexico, so it's mostly empty. And I look off in the distance, and I see this little grove of trees, right? And groves of trees don't happen naturally very much in New Mexico, so I thought, oh, there must be some kind of structure over there, you know? And so I drive over, and sure enough, there's two abandoned cinder block buildings, look like they were built like in the 1930s, and then a more modern two-story ranch-style house across the street, and then the ruins of like farm kind of stuff and an old motel across the street from all that stuff. So I get out, and I'm walking around these cinder blocks. Somebody has painted them this beautiful green color, and it says on there, Shady Greenhorn, right? S-H-A-D-Y, Greenhorn, like somebody who's, you know, new to the West, right, is Greenhorn. So I'm walking around taking pictures. Well, this guy who lives in the house across the way comes up and approaches me. And this, you know, these things can go one of two ways. Some people are really delighted that you're doing what you're doing, and other people are armed and want you off their property right now. And he was the former, thankfully, very nice older gentleman. And so I got chatting with him, and I asked him, you know, tell me the history of the place. And it had been a gas station with a post office and a machine shop and a garage. And then across the way had been like a little 5 or 6 room motel, right? And the guy had live bears on the property. And I said, well, Shady Greenhorn is an interesting name. And he goes, well, it's a funny story. The guy moved out here from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia in the 1920s, and he built this stuff and opened a little motel over there. And back then, before they built the 25, this gravel road was the road. This is how you went from Taos to Albuquerque. It was on this road. And so what traffic there was had to go past him. And it turns out he made moonshine, this guy. And the reason he had the bears is he had dug a hole in the ground with this iron plate, and the bears were chained to the iron plate. So if revenuers ever came around, they had to contend with 2 live bears to see what was under that door, you know? So needless to say, he never got caught. But anyway, I guess what he would do, yeah, here's the shady part, which is so funny. I mean, the guy was like so self-aware, and it's also clever. Anyway, it was very American. So he's making this moonshine, right? And I guess when the guy took the property over, he said the whole basement of the machine shop was just full of it, mason jars. He said it was like rocket fuel. He'd never smelled anything like it in his life. He had to have, I believe it took 2 truckloads to take it all away. And I was very disappointed he had not saved at least 1 jar because I was so curious. But what he would do is, you know, cars would pull over to get gas or whatever, and he had a little diner in there. And he'd get talking to him, like, hey, why don't you have dinner? Why don't you have lunch or whatever? So while the family's eating there, he'd bring out some of this moonshine and try to get Dad to have a drink or two, right? Well, I guess this is like, you know, very high proof alcohol. So after a couple of these, Dad would be sauced, right? He couldn't drive anymore. Well, why don't you stay in the hotel across the street? That'll be great. So he would end up selling not only a tank of gas, but a meal, a jar or 2 of this moonshine, plus a motel room to the people that happened to wander through his place there. But Shady Greenhorn, it's an actual place. That's one of my, so in terms of shade, it is very shady. They got trees and the whole thing. But that's not what
cool.
he meant.
Yeah, sure.
America.
So Brian, what's the best place that you've been to? Or if you have a favorite story or anything like that, just something that really strikes you as being, hey, this was an iconic thing for me.
I think small town America is very precious. And I think that, I grew up in Iowa mostly, and those kind of core values, duty, honor, being as good as your handshake, looking people in the eye, making promises and keeping them. Like, just when was the last time you heard the word honor in a sentence in America? It doesn't even exist hardly. I probably can't use all fingers of one hand to name the honorable people that I know,
Right.
Which isn't a ding against people. It's just our culture has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And when these little towns are just getting ground to powder, and they're losing their population. The kids are moving away, and they're left full of whatever old people live there. And when they die, that's it. There's nothing. And there's a process that you see repeated again and again and again throughout the country. And that, where you see, maybe there's a Walmart on the edge of town, and town that used to have like 10,000 people in it, And I'll use, I'll tell a happy story, a full circle story. So I'll take Falfurrias, Texas, as one of the best town names ever. Texans are good at naming stuff. Arizonans are also really good at naming. Like, there's a place in Arizona called Two Guns, Arizona. It doesn't get better than that in the West, So Falfurrias had a big dairy. That was their reason to be existing. Walmart had parked a smaller version of one of their stores out on the edge of town. And Falfurrias at its peak, that whole area within 50 miles probably didn't have 50,000 people in it. And that's just not enough people to have a Walmart. So what happens when that happens to small towns? That's not Walmart's fault. They sell for less. That's their premise, and they're not lying. They do that. So when the city fathers grant that lease, they think, we're creating 100 new jobs for our town or whatever Walmart needs. What they're really doing is they're turning all of their business owners downtown into part-time greeters at Walmart. And their downtown becomes abandoned overnight because Walmart is selling at retail for less than these guys can buy for wholesale. So the bike shop goes away, and the men's clothing store goes away, and the barber shop goes away, and the optometrist goes away, and the doctor goes away, and all those the core businesses that make any town work. Walmart does all that stuff, or a high percentage of it, and pretty soon that's all there is. So the first time I went to Falfurrias, the main street was literally the buildings were crumbling and falling into Main Street, and there was no way to pick it up, and nobody cared to. Whatever was left there were people that just, the town was dying. There was no question about it. And so I made a bunch of images of it. And if you're looking at the best place to look at to see the most of my work is on my B-Fuller photo on Instagram, obviously, but the same B-Fuller photo on Facebook. I don't really post to the Facebook page very much anymore, but it's divided by state. And so you can see some of these older images. If you just click on Texas, you'll see, 500 images from Texas, and some of the things I'm talking about will be in that file when you go to my fan page. But anyway, it was really bad. And that highway is also apparently the highway that the Banditos motorcycle club uses to get meth from the border to like Dallas, right? Between that and Walmart, these little towns don't have a lot of chance on that highway. It's tough. It's tough. And so anyway, they about, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, I saw that they were putting in a big gas station, like a big Shell or something, a big convenience store. Stripes, I think, is the chain down there. That's a big one. They partner with Valero usually. And so they were putting in like a, 15 pump, a big gas station and a big convenience store, which is a lot. That's, it's probably 15 jobs, 16 jobs for a town that size is pretty great. And then I saw that the next time I went by there, that Godfathers had taken over these buildings, the pizza company, that were falling into Main Street, and restored them. They changed the front so that you could tell it was a Godfather's, but they fixed it. Like, they cleaned it up, they fixed it, it looked great, it was really cool into the flavor of the town. And so the whole thing had kind of perked up. Somebody had opened up a little coffee shop down the way. The theater wasn't reopened as a movie theater, but they were doing like plays or something, it looked like. And I'm not the mayor of Falfurrias, so I don't know all the details, but that's just at a drive-by. That's what it looked like to me, And then I went through, the next time they were holding, because the school was also abandoned. Whenever you see an abandoned elementary school, that's the end. That's the end. As soon as the liquor store closes, that town is finished. That's the last business that survives in every town is the liquor store. And I'm not making that up. The liquor store goes, you're done. So when the elementary school is out, that means there's no families anymore, right? And so there's been long abandoned. The movie theater done, and the high school abandoned also. And you could walk around inside that thing, and it wasn't like fenced off, so you could like go check it out. It's as much as whatever your risk level assessment was of stuff falling down on you. So anyway, here 5, 6, 7 years on from that first visit, I go back and they're having like a town festival, and all these people are out there, and a ton of them were under 35 years old with little kids, which I was so excited to see. And in the abandoned high school, they were having a 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the gym, which probably, who knows when the last time that thing was used, probably 30 years. So it was really cool seeing that town come back. But I remember that story because it's the only one like it I know.
You sure don't hear that story very often, that's for sure.
So whoever the guy was that decided to build that Valero and Stripes combo over there, and Godfathers are personally responsible for saving that town.
That's a great story.
And I love that. And that's that to me, that's such America population-wise, yes, it's L.A., it's New York, it's San Francisco, it's Chicago, it's Dallas, it's Miami. It's like 1 out of every 8 Americans is from California, right? So they have a seat at the table. Meanwhile, places like Oskaloosa, Iowa, and Kalispell, Montana, and Whitefish, Montana is my favorite places on earth. Colfax, Iowa. These little places, they have stories, and they're filled with interesting people. They're filled with interesting history. Like Colfax has this big monastery up on a hill overlooking everything. You have no idea what this thing is you're driving by. It's just like a blip as you're going by at 80 miles an hour on I-80, And so getting off the town, getting onto the 2-lane, and really checking it out is, I think, one of the real pleasures of being alive. And it's been a treat for me to kind of document these places while they still exist in their current form,
That's nice.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Brian, we're looking through your feed, and we can see a lot of different stuff you have in there. You do a lot of awesome vehicles. I like your signs, all that stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
If you had a best shot, what would it be, and why would you like it the best?
Well, I have 2 favorites, actually. So the one that I use for my logo, for my business cards, and for my Instagram page, where you see the B-Fuller photo across, that's from a place called Pilot Point, Texas. And it's the rear end. You can hardly tell it, but it's the rear end of just a rusted out car in a guy's yard there. And the guy was funny about it, because when I can tell somebody's there, I'll ask permission usually, because I don't like getting shot at. And especially in places like Texas where people are heavily armed and property rights are important.
Yeah. Yes, there's places
in the middle
like
of nowhere, and you happen to accidentally knock a door open, then it's like some corn stalks might be dragged about it. That's about it. Anyway, so I love it because I love texture and like color gradient, light, and that image really shows that in the back of this car. It's not really a picture of anything. It's the left rear tail light in the beginning of the trunk is kind of the arc that you see in the image. And that's really probably my all-time favorite image. I made that, 5 years ago now. You always like the things you're shooting now the best, right? But if I'm picking from all of my favorites, that's high on the list. And then another one that I also have a business card that I use that was actually from Colorado. I'm going to find the name of this town. It's one of these places where it's down to it's a bar, a closed gas station, a private home that's probably owned by a mechanic, I would guess. And that's the town. There's a couple of abandoned things, an abandoned farm, it has hand trowel. You can tell. You spend a lot of time on the road when you can tell how they made the road. And in America, there are still a few sections, small, short sections of hand troweled concrete from the 1920s or before. And back in the WPA days or what, but there's a section of Route 66, old Route 66, because it moved several times, in Missouri. There's about 1.25 miles of hand troweled concrete left. And it's just beautiful. I mean, it's so much nicer than what I'm driving on, or what all of us are driving on right now. But also you can imagine.
WPA projects here in our area, too. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it had to be something like that. But you can see, like, the subtle trowel marks. And I mean, it's just gorgeous. And if I can think of the name, Albatross, Missouri, right down from there is where this piece of road is. And there's a couple, this happens a little bit, and I love to see it when I do, where people will be retiring and they'll buy a town. They'll buy one of these towns. And as part of their thing to do while they're retired is they fix them up. And so Albatross is one of these places. They actually bought the town adjacent to Albatross, which is the main street of the town, is this section of road I'm talking about. And they're restoring the buildings. They're making it like a museum. You can't go into buildings, but if you look in the window, it looks like you're looking at a 1962 malt shop. It's that kind of. It's very nostalgic. I think that stuff is really cool. Whenever I see it, I love to find it. Cool. There's a guy out in New Mexico, in Chloride, I believe it's called. It was an abandoned town. The last people lived there in the 1930s. And this guy from California bought the town, and it's just every day he's out there next to his RV working on the building. Talking about off the beaten track, but it's so cool. I mean, it just is so cool to see these things.
We came up on a place like that out in our area too. A guy bought the whole town, kind of trying to get some stuff going on it. Who knows if it'll come to anything, but it's a pretty neat project. Somebody takes that on and tries to make something happen.
Well, and as a Nevada guy, I got to give a little plug. There's a guy doing this. There's a town called Goldfield, Nevada, which at one time was the gold capital of Nevada. And the whole town is basically a complete ghost town. It peaked at about 25 or 30,000 people about 100 years ago. And then the mine ended, and that was that. And so before that happened, if you go to my B. Fuller photo, I'm sorry, I'm going to digress here for a second. I found this Colorado. This picture I really love. It's on my B. Fuller photo Facebook page. And if you go to the Colorado folder in the photos section, it's the cover image. It's called Villain. I made it in 2017 in Ludlow, Colorado. Is the name of the town. I was trying to remember. But there is a bar still open in Ludlow. At least it was last year when I went by it.
I've been up there. I have a friend that lived in a little town right outside of there, so I've been to that. That's the coal camp and the whole Ludlow thing.
No, and this picture shows, I call it black and white and burned is the technique, and it takes dozens and dozens of layers of different things to get this look. And if I have something that's unique to me, it's this. There's no filter that just creates this. This is, about a dozen filters layered again and again and again with other little stuff that's in the Camera Plus app that you can tinker with. And you get this look of a very vintage photograph that's been sitting on a shelf for 50 years,
So, Brian, you want to talk about some of your art shows or any upcoming excursions or book plans or anything you got in the works?
I got stuff going on. I have never done an art show. I was going to do one prior to the gift of COVID. Down in one of my favorite places in the universe, and you can see it on Instagram, is the Desert Air Motel in Sanderson, Texas. And I tell you, if you want to go for a drive, just take the 90. You go from, I believe it starts at about Fort Stockton down to Laredo. And the Texans call it the Far West or Big Bend country. And there's a national park out there called Big Bend National Park. I don't know how many tens of thousands of square miles it is, but there's not 10,000 people living in that whole area, and half of those live in Alpine, Texas. Sanderson has about 800 people in it. And another one of these wonderful stories, and I had noticed because I love making this drive, it's about 650 miles, I think, from El Paso to Laredo, taking this way. 100% worth it. Like, it's so great. Prada Marfa is on that road. Marfa Target is on that road, which these two tiny art installations that are hysterical out in the middle of this place. They're just pure genius. The Marfa lights you can see in Marfa, Texas. And Marfa is like the Aspen of that area. So it looks staged because it is, but it's still filled with a bunch of cool people that aren't rich people from Houston. But anyway, there's this couple from Austin, Texas, and they come out that way to Big Bend. They've got kids, and they would bring them out there to go camping and fishing and, boating, playing in the river. And they kept driving past this old motel in Sanderson, the Desert Air. It had kind of a cool old sign that wasn't lit anymore, and it's kind of run down. And they just, they go by it all the time on the way out to the park. Well, one time they're going by there, and they see a for sale sign up. And these guys are, I don't know, Nick, and they're like in their 30s, the high 30s, late 30s, I'll say. And so they're like, well, let's just ask, So they go and they ask, and they end up buying this motel. Okay, and so Nick, the husband, is pretty handy, and so he comes out there from Austin on the weekends, and he'll work on it. But what they did, his wife, when they redecorated the place, they because it still looks like a 1950s or 60s, cinder block motel, because that's what it is. But they have dolled it up so nicely, and she is a big fan. She's a big photography fan and art fan, and there's a lot of, obviously Texas is heavily, it inspires not just me. There's a lot of people that love Texas. And so she went through and she just picked out her favorite things from Texas artists and used that as the wall art in the different rooms. So if you go to the Desert Air, room 102 is the B. Fuller photo room, and there's two of my images hanging on the wall there. And they had a grand opening 2 years ago, I think, when they got the sign finished. They had done the whole motel property, but they got the sign relit. And so I came down there for that and was part of the grand opening. It was so cool. I mean, it was just so cool. Like the whole town turned out. It was a big event, So I signed my images and put their words on the back and everything. So they're numbered originals that they have in room 102.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's very cool. So but anyway, this year we're going to start an art fair. And so they had invited me to come down there, of course, and a dozen other folks maybe that make up the other artists primarily that are in that group, right? And so I decided to do it. It was supposed to be in May, but of course that all got killed, and they were going to do it again in October. But my wild guess is that it will more likely happen next May. But that was going to be the first actual art show in Sanderson, Texas, not New York. I'm not sure what that means. But I've always been I'm a control, as free form as my life is. I'm very, I like to be in charge of it myself, So
that's good.
I've never accepted any gallery offer. I don't, on my website when it's up. Right now it's on the frizz, but by the time this happens, hopefully it'll be fixed. So I've always sold that way. Every image is limited to only 5 prints. And then I destroy the digital file, so they're all signed, numbered, and I write whatever the words are that go with that image. Those are handwritten by me on the back of the image.
Well, that's nice. That's a nice way to present them.
Yeah, so it's something that the people that collect my work, which thankfully there are a few, can pull that thing off the wall and show that and tell the story of that piece.
Yeah, that's cool.
You can probably tell I'm chatty, so I don't mind. I like telling this story. Oh, that's so cool. I remember that day I went. And
that's all right. So, Brian, you kind of started with a little bit of a list earlier in the show, but you got a list of people that you want to do a shout out to? Some of your Instagram people, maybe some art influences, anything like that?
Yeah, well, like I said, the classics, like Diane Arbus was always, as a kid, I so admired her photography. Andrew Wyatt, of course, the obvious one. when I first really started paying attention to it on Facebook, and then as Instagram came along, Elizabeth Thorpe is someone whose work I really love. And she was a very successful photographer in Los Angeles, and then got married and moved out to the Carolinas and started like tending bar or something. And has only in the last year or so started shooting again. It's so great seeing her work. Michael Mays, I mentioned, who's my roommate, a really sweet friend of mine, another professional photographer who encouraged me early on, a gal named Cameron Martin, who passed last year. When people that you think are great tell you, like whenever Elizabeth Thorpe clicks like on something, I have to pull over and cry. Like twice a year, maybe she'll click like on a picture of mine, and it's like if you played guitar and Jimi Hendrix clicks like on your song, and so it means a lot. Jill Coop's work, I love her eye. Sierra Winds is one of my favorites. And I follow, a few of the hubs. I'm a Rust Lord VIP or whatever, so I follow a bunch of their pages. I do a lot of the TRB pages, the everything, transport, the ICU pages. ICU USA is great. And then I've started, because I've been shooting black and white so much more the last 12 months. I mean, I'm shooting the same thing all the time, but I'm editing in black and white, the miracle of digital. And so I've been doing like B&W Zone. I like one of the gifts of the ways that Instagram has changed since Facebook bought it have been almost universally not good. But one thing they changed that I like is you can follow a particular hashtag. And so, like, if you just follow the contemporary photography hashtag, you'll see this huge range of phenomenal photography from all over the world. So I always find that inspiring, and it's random. So like when I'm following Abandoned After Dark or Abandoned Seekers, some of these pages, these hubs that I really enjoy, you're seeing all kind of similar-ish things. When you're on a more generic one like that, it's everything, and I think I find that really inspiring. It gets my creative juices flowing. That part is great. I love being able to really hone in on stuff, but also still be able to see all kinds of things. So I'm not just looking at one thing all the time, because obviously that's what I'm shooting. That's what I'm interested in. Those are the things, the kinds of things that appeal to me. But when I see, the work of different kinds of artists from all over the world, it makes me see the things I see in a little bit different way. It adds some seasoning to the sauce.
It's some good ideas, and that's good stuff.
So, Brian, what's the best way people can get in touch with you? Is it through your website or email or direct message? The simplest way, really.
Yep. It's just Instagram me. That's the easy way. It's just direct message there. And I respond. I respond to every comment. It's me. I have a small a media management business also, but I run myself. My own Before Photo is me. It's me personally. So anybody that replies to a comment there, you're talking directly to me, and I try to respond in real time as much as I possibly can. Hopefully, I want the work to be as accessible as possible and get people who maybe normally wouldn't think like, oh, I could do that, to go, oh, I could do that. I'm not trying to make it so. I'm not trying to make it this lofty. Like, I love T.S. Eliot, but I can't write poetry in Greek or Latin. That is not me. So whenever I get a note from a dude that's like a truck driver who says to me, bro, that really touched me, or I get that, or that happened, I understand exactly what you're talking about. That's exactly what I'm trying to achieve. I want to make it like a gateway to this other thing. And I don't know if they're going to move directly from me to Shakespeare, but at least it gets them thinking about, like, I could do this. And it's such a pleasure to me to do it. And I have literally hours every day of enjoyment I get from doing this. And
there's so much, there's so many styles, and there's so many different kinds of images, and it's always a treat. So one last question we like to ask is if there's anything else you'd like to add. Maybe talk about your book, maybe a little more about your website.
Because I'm terrible at marketing. I tell you a story about an art show with 800 people coming to it instead of my book. That's why I'm at sleeping at Red Roof tonight and not the Ritz. Let me tell you. Yeah, I have a book, and I was mildly productive during the quarantine period in Nevada, and people have been asking me for years, "You should do a book. When are you going to do a book?" So I finally did a book. It's finished. I'm publishing it because, again, I'm a control freak. So it's all museum quality paper. It's about 98% done, but I think it's going to be approximately 24 inches by 17 inches in the hardback version. I'm only doing 100 pressings of the hard book, so they're all signed and numbered. People can, if they want me to personalize it, like, Uncle Joe, blah, 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 whatever, I'll write that in there while I'm doing it. So there's 100 of those, and then I'm just, however many paperback versions, and the paperback is small, I don't know the dimensions yet, and it's still nice, but it's not archival 140-pound paper, but it'll still be a nice book. Definitely coffee table worthy. So that's happening. And then hopefully in the spring, this COVID, I'm not the only one I know has put a damper on my plans, but I had planned to either in the Arts District in Las Vegas is booming. Folks, if you're coming to Vegas, yes, the Strip is fun and Fremont Street is fun and all that stuff, but truly it's one of the great cities of America, and you've got to get out into it and see it. And the Arts District has really flourished in the last few years, and you get a little taste of it down at the end of Fremont Street. There's a thing called Container Park that has a 30-foot tall praying mantis. Yeah, there's a big praying mantis down there that breathes fire at night. So there's stuff happening. But there's a vibrant art scene there, and they've been steadily revitalizing Las Vegas Boulevard between downtown and Strip. Las Vegas Boulevard is like 5th Street in Vegas is what it really is. They just renamed it. When you're on the Strip, you're actually in a town called Paradise, Nevada. You're not in Las Vegas. When you drive towards downtown, there's a sign up across Sands, is basically the border, or Sahara rather, is basically the border of Las Vegas. It'll say "Welcome to Fabulous Las Vegas" is one of the famous signs that you see. Yeah. So they've amended that to say "Fabulous Downtown Las Vegas," but that's really Vegas. And the original high school of Las Vegas, which is this magnificent Art Deco Southwest combo. I mean, it's so gorgeous, is down there. The original courthouse is still there. They've converted where they prosecuted all the mob guys in the 80s was the Clark County Courthouse is now the Mob Museum. And so when you're going through the tour, you're actually sitting in the seats where these guys were prosecuted. It's really cool. So anyway, there's a whole area now that it's getting cleaned up and fixed up, and I'm hoping that when I'm ready, it'll be ready, and I can rent a gallery space there, and it's called Storytellers Gallery, and I'm a drinker and a storyteller and a talker, and I love hearing other people's stories. So I figure, the gallery is not really going to have like office hours so much. But what'll happen is it'll open up sometime during the day when I feel like having it open, and people can come out, have a drink. I'm going to have storyokie instead of karaoke. You can drink free as long as you're sitting there telling a story, kind of. I'm very excited about that. Hopefully we'll sell some art once in a while also, because you do have to pay for the booze and the rent.
That's awesome, man.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Well, Brian,
so we'll find out.
We have sure enjoyed your stories. You are a storyteller, and that's what we like. We really do appreciate that, and we hope we give you a chance to share your stories. So
I appreciate it, guys.
Been our pleasure to interview you, and we appreciate you taking the time to pour your life passion out. It's always fun to hear what makes other people tick. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thanks for the opportunity, guys. Really a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye.
What an exciting treat for us to have Brian share his adventures and stories with us here on the last and final episode of the Capturing the Abandoned podcast. You can find Brian on Instagram at bfullerphoto. That's BFULLERFOTO. And on his beautiful website, bfullerphoto.com. Thank you, Brian, for being such a patient and exciting guest. The music bed for this show is titled Just Traveling and was composed and performed by Mr. Lex Nichols, my good friend and co-host. You can find more of Lex's music on his website at lexnichols.com, on his YouTube channel, Spotify, Pandora, and of course, iTunes. Be sure to give him a listen. You should be able to find our podcasts wherever podcasts are served, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Overcast, and many more locations. Once again, we want to thank all of our guests for being a part of this adventure, and to all of you listeners out there. Take care, and we hope our paths cross again sometime in the future. And until then, goodbye.